content of this channel is for mature audiences. Parental discretion is advised. You're tuned in to the Green Gorilla channel. Please make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell notification button. And please, feel free to share the video. Thank you.
Me. What's good, everybody? I'm the G with a PhD, man. You know who I be. And you're tuned in to the Green Gorilla channel. This is the place where black men can express themselves freely, straight up with no chasers. And like I always do before I get things started, I want to give a shout out to all the members of the Green Gorilla channel. So let's get that going. Shouts out go to Rick Ross, Sandra Jean 955, Timothy Blewett, The Final Watcher, Brotherly Love, Charles Gilmore III, Diego Harry, Patricia Colley, 7Q Pitt, Kwaku Asasi, Supertech, and Liz Terrell. Shouts go out to Rogish the Billmonger, Michael Ross, Gregory Oliver, Darkside Misanthrope, Greg, Antonio Ferria, Barry Little, Alan Wiley, Mr. Valentino, Jason Hales, Black Men Being Brutally Honest, 77 Base X, Craig, and Omni Americana. Shouts out to y'all. Shout out to Cameron87, Deshaun Nolly, Brian Peaks, Nelso, Apex, Kareem Henry, Doc The Rock, Julius Ferguson, B. Hillfire, Jay Charles, Mark Houghton, Lee Ways. Shout out to y'all, man. Shout out to Jeffrey Speed, The Face, Mark Swift, Show Me, Black Dog, Odd Collar, Deanne, Donald Watts. Shout out to y'all, man. Shout out to Cozy Corner, hiphop.catv, Coach DC, The Remedy, Kashif Caldwell, Ominous Black, I Am Black Man, Nichita, True King 337, Mr. Blue Collar, Barnolas, Kyle J. Sura, and I'm Just Jules. Shout out to Ab Media 83, Brian McMurray, TD Hip Hop Media, Drew Main, Artisan MC, Mr. Heat, Afro Pessimist, Isa Abdul Sahir, Sir Anthony, MLR, Charles Rogers, Universal 178, Blacksword 404, Rasheed Barnes, and Aaron Smith. Shout out to DH, See Truth the Revelator, Gold Professor, Arthur Unknown, Dr. Tiasan Johnson, Kalan Jakala, Ricky Dawson, Cedric Bowman, True 7360, BK Born Shaheed, James Washington, and Hostile ADEP. Shout out to WPR1, BGS Ibmore, Marvin Battle Jr., and I can't forget my brother in heaven, Forrest Windu. Shout out to y'all, man. And on the Patreon side, I want to give a shout out to Ryan, Darnell Smith, Chris York, Excalibur, Jason Warren, Soul Pen, Anu219, Pursuer Prisoner, Taz, Kwaku 217, Dragon 59, Supreme Ibmore, Adrian Hicks, Jay Bailey, Mr. Michi, and Mo Mal. Oh, and last but not least, Asangwa. Shout out to y'all, man. Y'all deserve a round of applause. Y'all get my highest honors, and that's honest. Shout out to y'all, man. Shout out to everybody watching and everybody in the chat. Shout out to y'all. And if you're wondering how you can support the Green Gorilla channel on an ongoing basis, well then, here's how you do it. What's good, everybody? I'm the G with a PhD, and you're tuned in to the Green Gorilla channel. The place where black men can express themselves freely, straight up, no chaser. Today I want to introduce you to my new membership program that consists of 5 levels where you can invest in the Green Gorilla channel on a monthly basis and receive level-specific perks. Memberships are special because they improve the quality of the content of the channel and will help me to be able to keep the channel going. Now, to participate in the Green Gorilla channel membership program, all you have to do is hit the join button, which is located right next to the subscribe button on my channel page. Now, for all of my subscribers who decide not to participate in my membership program, nothing will change. The content will keep coming the way it always has. Thanks for watching, and be careful out here, people. bless. What's good, y'all? You know who I am, man. I'm GG. You tuned in to the Green Gorilla channel. It's, of course, the place where black men can express themselves freely, straight up with no chaser. So shout out to everybody in the chat. And, there's some controversy going on in the chat, man. I want y'all to be nice. Black Knight Fool, man, you have every right to express your opinion. I understand why you're concerned. I get it. I understand it. But let me address it. So the reason I did this, or I wanted to do this show in particular, was because I wanted to find out, from a historical or historiographic basis, whether or not life was as harsh and as oppressive and as dominating and demeaning as feminists characterized their position in Western Europe. I mean, is it as they say it is? That's why I wanted to do this show. And that's why I think it's important. I understand that, feminism has been weaponized against men of all races, colors and creeds, classes, and sexual orientations. Some more than others. And I've even, dedicated the last two shows to explaining that via the work of Tommy Curry. And, we've traced those steps. But today what I want to do is take, a look at medieval Europe and women's role and position in it, and to determine whether it was as horrendous as it's characterized as being for women by feminists. That's all I want to do. And I know this show is not going to probably generate a lot of hits, get a lot of people watching because, I'm talking about a subject that's pretty, not run of the mill in this space anyway. Like what would I care about what women in medieval Europe are going through? Well, one of the things I want to bring to your attention right off the bat is that, black men definitely don't have anything to do with what was going on in medieval Europe at all, period. I think that goes without saying, man. And if anybody, would put forward the idea that black men had anything to do with what was going on in medieval Europe, I mean, come on, crying out loud, man. All I'm going to do is just give them a crazy look like, really? Are you serious, man? That's the look I would give them, like, for real? We got something to do with medieval Europe? Black men are implicated in that as well? Come on now. But, the way feminists characterize their position throughout history, particularly Western history, it's one in which, they've always been subjugated and dominated and berated and subjected to misogyny. So I just kind of wanted to go over, what actually their position was and how much power they had, and whether or not different women from different classes, because there were different classes in medieval Europe. I mean, not all women and men were of the same classes. So it's important to, do some historical analysis to demonstrate, what was it like for the average, run-of-the-mill woman in Western society during the medieval era? Like, what was it like? And then I want to go over what it was like on another show in the Victorian era. And then what I would also like to do is discuss the position of women in ancient culture, but in particular, ancient Egypt or Kemet. I would like to see, a comparing and a contrasting of the social positionality of women in those various time frames and in those various cultures. That's what I would like to see. Okay. But, let's just get right to this, man. I'm not going to spend too much of your time tonight. But I think it's important. I just think it's important. Okay. So let's just get right to this, man. All right. All right. I don't know if you can see this or not. Let me turn the music on. So we're going to talk about, and let me cut this little thing off I got going on here, man, because I don't want that to be playing here right now. I don't want that playing. Okay, so this, what I'm going to do is read to you an excerpt from the World History Encyclopedia. And the installment is called Women in the Middle Ages. And the article was written by a scholar by the name of Joshua J. Mark. He was a professor, or is a professor, at Marist University. And, we can just look at it and examine it, analyze it, and determine whether or not women's positionality in this culture was as bad as they say it is. Especially relative to the other men who were also subjected to the political and the social positionality within that culture. That's what I'm interested in doing, okay? So let's just get through the article and then I'll I'll comment as I go through it, but I'm just interested in doing the exercise. So let's just go ahead and do it, all right? I haven't read through the entirety of this article. I just kind of skimmed through it. But let's do it, man. Okay, so it starts off, the lives of women in the Middle Ages were determined by the church and the aristocracy. And that should be a given. The church and the aristocracy in medieval Europe were the ones that governed the activities of everyone else beneath them. So you had the clergy and you had nobles. Okay, this is how their society was established. It was hierarchical. Okay, so the medieval church provided people with the big picture of the meaning of life and one's place in it. The aristocracy ensured that everyone stayed in their respective places through the feudal system of government, which divided society into three classes. So you had the clergy, you had nobility, and then you had serfs. The clergy, nobility, and serfs. Now, I can tell you right now, the clergy had a great deal of power and influence, particularly the Catholic Church. They had some influence over what kings and queens and lords and dukes and princesses, what they were able to do. But there was always a conflict of power between the clergy and the nobility. Okay. At some points in European history, the nobility checked ecclesiastical authority and vice versa, where the ecclesiastical authority of the clergy checked the nobility. But the serfs pretty much didn't have any say in the matter, whether they were male or female. And that's what I think, is often lost. Okay? But he does go on to say that women's place in the clergy, if they were ever members of the clergy, it was restricted to the nunnery. So you had women who were nuns in medieval Europe. Noble women's positions were dictated by how much land they brought to marriage, because land equaled power. So if you were a woman and you were a part of a family who was noble and your family had a lot of land, that means you had a lot of power. Period. So this isn't a one-size-check-all. Like you check the box woman and then you're subjected to oppression and domination. You don't have a voice or a say at all. That's just not how this works. And it's interesting, though, because, the way it's told now is just, women were treated horribly and according to the dictates of, the evil and the ominous patriarchy. But when you look back at the annals of time and you look back at the nuances of history, you'll see that that's actually not the case. But anyway, therefore, the quality of life and opportunities for autonomy could vary significantly among the upper class. And this is interesting also, though. Women, this is what he says next. Women of the lowest class actually had more freedom of expression than the other two, because life was uniformly difficult for the serfs, male or female. And women worked alongside men in the fields and in the medieval guilds as equals or near equals. That's important, man. So, as it pertains to expression, being able to exercise negative liberty, to speak how you want to speak and to express yourself the way you want to, members of the clergy and nobility who were women had less ability to express themselves freely than did serfs, who, again, if they were women, they worked along with men in the fields and in medieval guilds. So one of the things that I want to draw to your attention here is that, these ideas about women being subjected to the patriarchy, well, it all depends on what time frame you're talking about and what class of women you're talking about. And as it pertains to serfs, most of the European population were serfs. Most of the population were neither the clergy nor nobles. But, I think that goes without saying, okay? So women's rights and opportunities in the Middle Ages were not uniform, even though those of the lower class had the least amount of variation. So scholars typically divide the Middle Ages into three periods. You have the early Middle Ages, which is between 476 to 1000 of the Common Era, the High Middle Ages between 1000 and 1300 CE, and the Late Middle Ages, which is 13 to 1500 CE. And it goes on to say that the rights of women from the earliest era through the last grew significantly owing to two distinct factors: the increasing popularity of the cult of the Virgin Mary and the development of the concepts of courtly love and chivalry. Okay, so women's status and opportunities would also expand after the outbreak of the Black Death pandemic, which occurred between 1347 and 1352, which killed so many that women were allowed to assume ownership and operation of their late husbands' businesses. Women's rights would reach their apex in the late Middle Ages, at which time more restrictions were implemented by the patriarchal system, primarily because women's social positions threatened the status quo. So it seems that, during the High Middle Ages, women had more freedom than they, had during the Late Middle Ages. So anyway, he goes on to talk about or discuss the changing attitudes towards women. Okay. And he says the cult of the Virgin Mary, which to me is nothing more than the cult of Isis Europeanized. So the cult of the Virgin Mary was not new to the Middle Ages. Mary had been declared the Mother of God by the Church in 431 CE at the Third Ecumenical Council. Mary's high standing, however, did little to elevate women's status in society. The church both demonized and elevated women through the dichotomy of the biblical tale of Eve, who caused humanity's fall from grace in the Garden of Eden, and that of the Virgin Mary, whose son was believed to have redeemed that fall. Women were simultaneously considered the source of all the ills of the world and the means of the world's redemption through the birth of Christ. So there's this dichotomy going on. Accordingly, women were at once denied the same social status as men, while legally being recognized as a man's partner, helpmate, and under certain conditions, even his equal. The view of women as either evil temptresses or virginal goddesses left no middle ground for a reasoned perception of woman as individual. Now, in the early Middle Ages, the woman as temptress model prevailed as clergy emphasized Eve's role in the fall of man. From the 12th century CE during the High Middle Ages onwards to the end, the cult of Mary was more popular, and so the perception of women improved. So in the early Middle Ages, people were more worried about Eve and the fall of man as they were during the High Middle Ages, in which they were more preoccupied with extolling the virtues of women owing to their involvement in the cult of Mary. Okay? So even so, women were still collectively demonized, even at the height of the cult's popularity, for failing to mirror the Virgin Mary's perfection. Now, women were certainly seen in a better light than they had been previously, but this did not mean the clergy, aristocracy, or males in general were interested in seeing them elevated above their supposed God-given place, as made clear in the Bible in such passages as the 1 Corinthians, chapter 11, verse 3, where it states that man is the head of the woman, or 1 Timothy chapter 2nd chapter, verses 11 through 15, which makes clear that women are subordinate to men, and Eve was the first sinner. Women were therefore always linked to Eve at the same time they were elevated by the association with Mary. And so there's a scholar by the name of Eileen Powers who he quotes. In considering the characteristic medieval ideas about woman, it is important to know not only what the ideas themselves were, but also what the sources from which they spring. What were the sources from which they spring? The expressed opinion of any age depends on the persons and the classes who happen to articulate it. And for this reason alone, it often represents the views of a small but vocal minority. In the early Middle Ages, what passed for a contemporary opinion came from two sources, the church and the aristocracy. So that's his quotation from Eileen Power, okay? Now, Power goes on to point out that those two sources, the one celibate and the other regarding women as an ornamental asset, were the least qualified to write on women. In spite of the official view of women as second-class citizens found in these sources, especially sermons and other ecclesiastical works, you have household records, legal documents, guild records, and other documents which show that women throughout most of the Middle Ages made a living in the same trades as men, frequently took over a business following their husband's death, and were valued merchants, artists, and artisans. Let me stop the music here. So basically she says the ecclesiastical powers or authorities and the nobility really didn't have an accurate description based upon their prejudices about what really actually was going on with women during the time. It's not accurate to look at their opinions and to draw a conclusion as to what positionality women actually occupy. But if you do empirical digging, looking at household records, legal documents, guild records, and other archival documents, and it demonstrates that women throughout most of the Middle Ages made a living in the same trades as men, often took over a business when their husbands died, and were valued merchants, artists, and artisans. So there you have it. I'm dropping a bomb on this one. I mean, for the most part, their lives were pretty similar to that of men, although the ecclesiastical and the aristocratic authorities had certain prejudices and assumptions about women's virtue and their character, stereotypes and so forth laid out, okay? So women's rights. So basically, the author goes on to say that throughout the Middle Ages, lower class women were bakers, brewers, milkmaids, barmaids, artisans, weavers, and primarily tenant farmers who worked alongside their husbands and children in the fields. The feudal system dictated that the land belonged to the Lord, who rented it to his tenants, the serfs, who were bound to the land. The Lord controlled every aspect of the serf's life, and this extended to a man's wife and daughters. Let me repeat that. The feudal system dictated that the land belonged to the Lord, not to the husband. The Lord of the land, who rented it to his tenants, the serfs, who were bound to the land. And the Lord controlled every aspect of the serf's life, and this extended to a man's wife and daughters, even to the man himself. What's interesting here, though, is, and this is just a continuation of the author's text, the Lord decided who a girl would marry. Not the girl's father, not the girl's mother. The Lord decided who the girl would marry. These marriages were not arrangements of courtly love or romantic love. And I'm pretty sure that the men had no choice in the matter, just as the women had no choice in the matter. If the Lord of the feudal land decided that that marriage was not going to occur, it would not occur. I'm pretty sure there were boys and girls who got married who really actually did not have romantic love be the catalyst for their marriages. That's just interesting to note. And if it's the same for the girls and, the women, it should be the same as for boys as for men. They couldn't make autonomous choices and decisions about their own lives in certain respects and aspects. But anyway, once the girl was married, her husband controlled her interest and was responsible for her behavior. And for this reason, women are not mentioned as often as men in legal matters in the early Middle Ages. The woman's husband would be sued if a woman transgressed, not the woman herself. And that's interesting to note, because some of this kind of thinking still remains within the context of the law and in social thinking. Like if your wife does something that's screwed up, you got to be accountable for it as the husband to some degree. And people will like, you got your wife is out of control and you're responsible for it. If she destroys property or does something illegal, you're going to be held accountable for it. But anyway, the woman's job was to take care of the home, help her husband at his work, and to produce children. Empower rights. The great majority of women lived and died wholly unrecorded as they labored in the field, farm, and the home. Now, I'm pretty sure that's the same for men as well. Many of them died wholly unrecorded as they labored in the field, the farm, and the home. And there you have a picture of a few serfs and so on, farming, men and women alongside each other doing the same kind of work. Anyway, the hierarchy of medieval society was rigidly maintained, and one very rarely rose above the station one was born into. There was no middle class, and the only hope for a woman to better her situation without marrying was to enter a nunnery. It is possible, as some scholars have suggested, that there were women who chose this route in hopes of education, but if so, they were largely disappointed. Priests, for the most part, saw no benefit in literate nuns. Even Inde, the famous female manuscript illuminator from Spain, was most likely illiterate. So a woman who, for the most part, transcribed, I guess, and, made copies of Latin text. Nuns learned their prayers and devotions by memory, not from books, although it is thought that many young women of means learned to read from the popular devotional work known as the Book of Hours. So then he goes on to talk about their legal and economic status. An emphasis on trade during the High Middle Ages provided greater opportunity for women. During this period, in Spain and France initially, the middle class began to emerge as merchants amassed enough wealth to be able to influence political matters. The medieval guild had a great deal to do with the emergence of the middle class and was also responsible for increased rights and responsibilities for women. So Along with trade during the high Middle Ages came greater opportunities for women, and their participation in the guilds enabled them to enjoy increased rights and responsibilities. So women of the new bourgeoisie could work with their husbands and fathers in a given trade, and frequently succeeded the male as head of the business upon his death. Woman as cheap labor was a concept already well established throughout the feudal system and was perpetuated by the guild system because women were legal non-entities and so could be paid less than a man. So they got paid less than a man. At the same time, many women during this period appear in legal documents as having been fined for various trespasses instead of their husbands, a significant departure from the precedent of the early Middle Ages. The lowest class of the serfs and the upper class noblewomen continued to live more or less as women had before them, and both were tied to the land in one way or another. And he quotes Powers here again. Among the nobility, marriage was a critical factor in the transmission of land and fiefs, and was arranged by families with great care, often with little consideration for the preferences of the parties involved, one or both of whom might be children. Only in periods and places where women had personal rights over land did they experience much independence. So higher class women had more mobility, but were still expected to remain in their socially accepted niche and perform the duties associated with that position. Now, exceptions to this rule in the early Middle Ages are notable because they are so rare. There's Athelflaed, Lady of the Mercians, who led Mercia's resistance against Viking raids and ruled her kingdom after her husband's death, or the theologian Saint Hilda of Whitby, who founded the famous monastery of Whitby in Northumbria. Other famous women of this time were Clotilda, wife of Clovis, king of the Franks, who converted her husband to Christianity. Man, I mean, she had some influence to do that. Theodora, wife of the Emperor Justinian of the Byzantine Empire, who was equal to her husband in influence, and Brunhilde of Austrasia, who ruled her country as sole monarch. So there are exceptions, to these rules about women having to perform or to, act in these rigid niches, okay? And then he goes on to talk about depiction and involvement in art. I don't know how important that is for what we're doing here, but maybe it'll prove useful because the article is so short. Maybe it'll prove useful for me to just go through it, okay? So anyway, by the time of the High Middle Ages, when the cult of the Virgin Mary was increasing in popularity, more noble women were exercising power, and some to such an extent as to significantly change their culture's perception of women. Two of the most powerful women in this era were Eleanor of Aquitaine and her daughter Marie de Champagne. Eleanor was one of the most powerful political figures, male or female, in the Middle Ages as a whole. She was the wife of Louis VII of France, from 1137 CE until the marriage's annulment in 1152 CE when she married Henry II of England. Eleanor took part in the Second Crusade, along with her ladies-in-waiting, managed her own estates and finances, and was an important patron of the arts, especially of romantic literature. So scholars continue to debate Eleanor's role in the development of the concept of courtly love and the chivalry code, but there is no doubt that many of the major French authors of the best-known works on this subject enjoyed her patronage. Her daughter Marie is said to have either helped her mother develop these concepts at Poitiers or was inspired by her mother's earlier efforts to establish the so-called courts of love at her estate in southern France. Now, the courts of love were allegedly convened to discuss matters relating to romantic love and relationships between men and women. Among the topics discussed and debated was whether romantic love could exist in marriage. It was decided it could not. That's important, man. It was not, they decided. And which was worse, to lose a lover to death or infidelity? Infidelity was considered worse because the lover took not only the future, but also the memories of the past. Marie was the patroness of one of the greatest writers of the Middle Ages, Chrétien de Troyes, whose Arthurian romances popularized the concept of courtly love and chivalry. Previously, a woman was the possession of a man and his inferior. The romantic poetry of the 12th century reversed this paradigm by encouraging the elevation of women who were to be protected and served by a refined and sophisticated gentleman, the chivalric knight. So here's where you begin to get the introduction of chivalry. So, it's a lot going on here. One of the things you got to be aware of, man, like marriage was not something that was based on love. That's one of the things you should know right now. You should just get that in your head. It wasn't about romantic love. It was an arrangement primarily made by lords and rich and aristocratic families to serve their best interests. That's what this was about. Until, you get some powerful woman who wanted to make it about love and who introduced the concept of, the chivalric knight, the sophisticated gentleman who was elevating the woman and pedestalizing her. And it was men who bought into this. Anyway, and it was all based on literature. Now, I'm not saying that, people in the medieval era were the first ones to write stories about romantic love. I don't think they were, because there's evidence that, in the Islamic world, you had writers who were, extolling the virtues of romantic love. And even if you look at Kemetic history, you'll see that there were tales and poems, about romantic love. But as an institution, it was primarily, especially in Western culture, it wasn't about love. It was about families and land. That's just important for you to understand, okay? Anyway, these works had a dramatic effect upon the aristocracy of medieval Europe, as scholar Norman Cantor observes. By making feminine qualities heroic, the Romantic poets enhanced the dignity of woman and made her a being with distinctive and valuable qualities. Now, the question is whether or not, the musings of these Romantic poets are supposed to be the guidelines by which we judge and assess the qualities of women in general. And are they accurate, and do they have any elements of truth to them at all? That's just, that's a question I'm throwing out there. Anyway, Eleanor and Marie were both associated with the medieval religious heresy of Catharism. And I don't know if you know what Catharism is, but it was a cult, a heresy, basically that was expunged during the Inquisition. I mean, so if you were a Cathar, you believed that women and men were equal, that the Catholic Church was for the most part a fraud. I mean, so Catharism, and there's another sect, a heretical sect called Waldenism, I think is the name of it. Waldenism. Don't quote me on it, but I'm pretty sure that that's the case. So you got Catharism and Waldenism, okay? And they were extinguished, just expunged by the Inquisition, okay? So, but Catharism is the strange hybrid between, if my memory serves me correct here, Manichaeism, which is a Persian cult, and Christianity, okay? So anyway, it departed from Orthodox Catholicism on a number of different points. It has therefore been suggested that the Romantic poetry of courtly love was actually created as a kind of scripture for adherents of the sect who would otherwise have been persecuted by the church. The great lady who appears in the poems under various names is Sophia, wisdom, and the devoted knight who serves her is the Cathar. This claim, while supported by considerable evidence, is still challenged by many modern-day scholars and far from universally accepted. Whether the poems were religious allegories or simple entertainment, they combined with the economic and social climate of the High Middle Ages to endow upper-class and middle-class women with greater respect and more equality. Women had always had the responsibility of taking over their husband's financial affairs after his death or when he was called away to transact some business or go to war. But this practice becomes more prevalent during the High Middle Ages. Women's lives in the late Middle Ages continued along the lines of the same paradigm, with, once again, the upper and lower classes remaining fairly steady and the middle class experiencing the most dramatic changes. Even so, the new model of women as individuals of value gained increasing momentum, which resulted in more upper-class women expressing themselves in literary and religious works. And so here you have a medieval woman with a text, and I see that there are members of the clergy here who are perhaps listening to her read. I guess that's what that is. I can't. That's what it looks like to me. Okay. At any rate, the most dramatic departure from the old paradigm is exemplified in the great French-Italian author Christine de Pizan. Born in Venice, Pizan moved to Paris when her scholarly father was appointed to astrologer at the court of Charles V. According to Pizan's own works, her father encouraged her literary interests while her mother felt she should restrict herself to women's work, such as learning to spin and weave cloth. Left with no means of supporting her family after both her father and husband died, Pizan turned to writing, becoming the first female professional writer in European history. And this paradigm extended to the church, which had denied women access to education through the lives and works of such notable authors as Julian of Norwich, Catherine of Siena, and Saint Teresa de Avila, among others. So, role in society, and this is the last part I'm going to read here, and then I swear I'm done. There's a short conclusion. While women in abbeys, nunneries, and at court in the late Middle Ages were finding new freedom in expression and greater acceptance among men, women of the bourgeoisie were facing renewed restrictions. Women in guilds in the late Middle Ages found less and less work as guilds began to deny them membership, and male co-workers made their lives more difficult. Women were still paid less than men, so it was more profitable overall for a shop to hire a female rather than a male. As this practice became more common, men were threatened by loss of work and retaliated. Guilds increasingly were restricted to men. So here you have a situation in which the labor, it was cheaper to employ her, so they started to do so, but then men, said this is not fair, and they began to restrict women into entrance into these guilds. So it's unclear whether more women entered nunneries during this period, but it is known that nuns were illuminating manuscripts as early as the 10th century CE. There were female scribes by at least 1274, and more women seem to have been involved in book production in the 14th century CE than before. Female religious orders seem to have remained stable, but a new order, the Beguines, started in the 13th century CE in France, quickly gained a significant number of adherents. The Beguines were all devoted women who lived lives of poverty, good works and charity, but were not nuns and could leave the group whenever they chose to. These women took care of each other and the surrounding community through the manufacture of goods and by providing services, and so were able to get around the new strictures of the guilds and live life according to their own values without having to marry or join a religious order. So you got beguinage. It's the way women circumvented marriage and, the clergy. Married women of the middle class in the high Middle Ages routinely took care of their husband's business accounts and took over after his death. This practice became more widespread following the Black Death pandemic, when women regularly operated their late husband's or son's business, gained title to their lands, and had greater autonomy than before. Noble women, who had been expected to manage their husband's estate and vassals when he was called away on business or to war, now became solely responsible for operations and transactions following the death of their husband and sons. Conclusion. Women in medieval times were not the passive victims of the religious and political patriarchy. Hey, look, here you go, baby. Women in medieval times were not the passive victims of the religious and political patriarchy, no matter how often that claim is repeated. And I've never even seen this line. Women in medieval times were not the passive victims of the religious and political patriarchy, no matter how often that claim is repeated. Women frequently found ways around the obstacles placed in their path or forged new paths when a challenge proved too great. They took over their husbands' businesses and ran them successfully, continued to work in guilds, or even formed their own guilds, as the textile guilds of Italy attest. Chaos Rain says, can you repeat that again? Women in medieval times were not the passive victims of the religious and political patriarchy, no matter how often that claim is repeated. The church, while upholding and encouraging the understanding that women were of less value than men, made some important concessions in recognizing the value of women, like the authors mentioned above, and equally important, ruling that women were individuals of value and not just a man's possession. In Denmark in the 12th century CE, the church ruled that rape was a crime against a woman and not, as had been previously held, a crime only against her father or husband. Even so, women's success and advances in the late Middle Ages could not overturn the status quo supported by the patriarchy of the church and aristocracy. Further restrictions were placed on women even as society entered the more enlightened era of the Renaissance. So one could argue that as you move into modernity, women begin to have less freedom. So in the high middle era, or of the medieval era, women had their most freedom. Okay, so let's look at it again. So look at these eras just to make sure that I'm not misquoting and misstating the facts. So you got the early Middle Ages, the high Middle Ages, and the late Middle Ages. So going into the era of modernity, which I would argue is marked off by Rene Descartes and his meditations, and a host of other events, Galileo, Kepler, Copernicus. But the whole point is, going into this era, one could argue that women's freedoms became less and less realizable moving into the modern era. But that by no means means that they were all just restricted to some evil and ominous patriarchy and didn't have anybody who enjoyed the ability to improve the quality of their lives as women. It belies the historical nuances and the realities of women's life in the West. And let's not forget, this is just telling a tale of what happened to women. It's not giving you the tale of what happened to men. I'm pretty sure not all men had like these stupendous, marvelous, and great lives in the medieval era. But I just wanted to lay it out there because, if you look at what feminists say now, they'll put it out there like women were they lived the lowest kind of life possible. But nobody was free in the way that we consider, freedom to exist in the world in which we can temporarily live. I mean, none of them had that kind of freedom. Most people didn't, okay? Especially peasants, serfs, bondsmen, lieges, and so on and so forth. That's why I wanted to do this. I just wanted to demonstrate this, to show you. It's not like women are making it out to be. That they had nothing. That their lives were just lived dictated by, the wills of their husbands. And then we're not even talking about, we haven't even begun to discuss the interactions interpersonally between men and women. And whether women are influential in the choices that men make about a whole host of issues. And we already know, all I know is if you ever been with a woman, they can be pretty fucking influential. I can tell you that. They can be pretty damn influential. If you deny that, you're lying. Can you do this for me? Can you do that for me? Will you help me with this? Will you help me with that? Will you please do this for me? I don't want that. I don't want to do that. They can be pretty freaking influential. I can tell you that. And I know that from experience. So anyway, man, I thought it would be useful to go over this. And the reason, again, that I went over it was because, damn, man, if you look at it and you hear the kind of things being professed and said right now, you would perceive the situation in which women lived and existed as one of like extreme drudgery and toil and punishment and restriction and, like they actually lived like African Americans lived during the period of antebellum slavery. This is why I wanted to go through this. Does this shit right here that women went through bear any resemblance to what black folks went through in relation to slavery? That's the ultimate question right there, my friend. That is the ultimate question, my friend. And if you think so, all I'm going to do is say, man, you got to be fucking kidding, man. I'm going to give you, I'm going to look at you like you're crazy, bro. That's all I can do, man. All I'm going to do is look at you like you're crazy. But hey, that's the world we live in now, where women, present the idea that, they've always been oppressed, and then, they need to crush the patriarchy. And we never even go over the historical facts to see what their lives actually were like during that era. So anyway, man, if you got something to say about this, man, you disagree, to me, it's important to discover the historical record. Now, this is just one author's covering or description of, that era. I'm pretty sure you can go back and find others who might have some things that are different to say about it. It is what it is, okay? All I'm trying to do is just give you some, indication, at least through, the lens of some scholar about what their lives were actually like. But we know it wasn't anything like the average black male or female slave in American society and culture. This is why when I hear it, I say to myself, like, what the fuck are they talking about? What are y'all talking about? I'm left looking at it like, are you serious, man? Like when they say, we need to crush the patriarchy, like, we were treated like, like Negroes. I'm like, are you serious? You can't be serious. You cannot be. But what's even worse is you got African American women who are taking up the same kind of arguments. The same kind of arguments, man. Like that men are like trying to perpetuate what white men did throughout the entirety of Western history. Like, and then it's not even accurate all the way down the line. I don't know, man. Look, I'm gonna leave a invite, man. I'm gonna take a quick break, man. If you want to come in and have a conversation about this, you can. If you don't, man, I'm about to get off, man. But again, this wasn't, some titillating discussion. It wasn't designed to be that. But this is like some deep dive into the facts. So I'll take a break real quick. You want to discuss this, you can. If you don't, I'm up out this joint. So, quick little break, man. All right, man, I'm back. I guess I ain't got no takers for this, man. But, I just wanted to point out, man, these women, man, I think they're exaggerating a little bit. Was it perfect for women? No. Was it perfect for men during that era? No. In many ways, I could see, being tethered to a woman as being a liability. In many ways. I mean, if you are a man and you're the legal entity responsible for what your wife does, man, that could put you in a very compromising position. Anyway, man, Chaos Rain, welcome to the stream, dog. What's up?
You're going to give me like 2 minutes. Let me get away from an area. It's too loud. It's 2 minutes.
Okay. I'll wait for you, man. I'll wait for you. So while we waiting on Chaos, man, I just, I'm just thinking to myself, man, when I hear what they say, and I hear, how they put it out there, man, I'm just like, man. It's like they're exaggerating, man. I look at it like, man. He says, can I link the article? Yes, sir, I definitely can link this article. I'm doing that right now. There you go. You have the link to the article. So there you go, man. Not, and I knew, this wasn't going to be so, titillating and super interesting, but I just wanted to go into it just to set the record straight. It was something I was wondering, in my own head. So there you go. Was it that bad? Were they shackled and chained? Were they stripped and beaten and flogged? Or did they enjoy many of the freedoms that men did of their era, especially men in their same class? That's what I wanted to get to the nature of and to the root of. And it seems, from the historical record that, many of these women enjoyed privileges, especially when their husbands passed, the same privileges that their husbands did. And I'm not trying to minimize, what women have gone through historically, but I mean, for crying out loud, man, the average white woman cannot claim the same kind of oppression as black folks in the United States, and in particular, black men who bore the brunt of the physical aggression related to racist, violence or racial violence. Why it's so difficult to even make this claim, I don't understand it. But now, I mean, the way it's characterized, it's like black men are trying to, carry out the patriarchy just as much as they claim white men did in the past. And that's the issue I have. That's why I'm doing this. Because the facts don't match up with the ideology and the retroactive historical analysis. That's my point. That's my point. And so then what I want to do, I ain't going to say I'm going to do this tomorrow. I think tomorrow I'm going to talk about domestic violence again because, I just read a paper, man, an article about a woman claiming that domestic violence is like on the uptick because of the COVID thing. And, she wrote the article in April. And I don't know, Dr. Johnson might cover this. If he does, I'll leave it alone. But I'm going to talk about DV in general. And I'm going to cover the work of Dr. Murray Strauss. Because I recently saw, a video show where, Mike Rashid was talking to Jessica X. And they were having this conversation. And Mike Rashid was basically like dumping all of the responsibility and culpability for the violence and intimate partner relationships on men. And, my whole thing is we have over 50 years of social scientific research that demonstrates that women are just as likely, if not more likely than men, to initiate acts of violence within the context of intimate relationships. We know this. But for some reason, it doesn't matter how much we know it, academically or empirically, the feminist activists always continue to push the same narrative. And guess who's the group of people who suffer disproportionately from the stereotyping associated with IPV? And who gets arrested for it the most? And who has the least likelihood of being able to deal with those kind of cases because they don't have the kind of money and social capital and the benefit of the doubt? Black men.
Mm-hmm.
So Chaos Reign, what's going on, man? I'm gonna let you say what you gotta say, bro.
My question, and this one I put in the chat room. So this myth, well, a lot of women, particularly European women, I hear for the last maybe couple decades, I could be wrong, that under patriarchy there was some form of oppression when women was not even protected or there's no rights. But from what you have read, it's saying something totally different. Am I right?
Well, not to say, that women had the exact same rights and social position of men, but I mean, they make it seem like they had no power at all. They had no influence at all, that they couldn't carve out any lane for themselves at all within the context of Western culture. That's why I did this show. I'm saying that for the most part, they're exaggerating. And I told you before, I did a show, not yesterday, but I think not Sunday, but Saturday, where I read Tommy Curry's work, where he basically demonstrated that much of what passes off as women being considered minorities was predicated upon the actual experiences of black men. They just wrote themselves into the picture and said that they were abused and treated like minorities and the Negroes or the Jews. They just wrote themselves into a category predicated upon the experiences of people who actually went through it, and they did so for the sake of being able to cash in on economic opportunities. That's the Bill Burr thing right there.
I see.
So there's a brother that says, I don't understand your question. I understand the question. I mean, the question is whether these people suffered the way that they say they have. Essentially, I mean, that's what I took from your question, without, getting too
Hmm.
artsy fartsy about it.
I see. I see. Yeah, man. That's a really good background of the history of, that a lot of black people are not aware of. That to understand our position, you have to understand the world history and us included into their history. And you have to understand Eurocentric history enough to understand not only how they think, but how their infrastructure affects not only them but others. And I think a lot of our people are very complacent to not really take the effort and time to really look into it. They feel that they're just like white people. So they feel whatever that's given to them in school is enough. Nothing more to really go into more detailed information from what I'm getting at with a lot of our folks. And I tell people many times the history you get from any institution, if you're not doing more thorough understanding, more research, and finding just older books, they're not. They'll give you a snippet, but they're not giving you the actual history. Because by understanding it more, you will not only have appreciation, but you understand how they think and behave, and your position to what you should do as people, especially black men.
Word.
So that way you don't live in a box state of all of these terminologies like left wing, right wing, all these things. Once you understand them well, it becomes clear.
So I want to address something in the chat right quick. So you got this guy named the Enterprise. Why do we care about medieval European women? Well, first of all, we care about what women are saying as a whole. First of all, you got to understand that feminism is a movement primarily initiated by white women. Black women wouldn't have developed feminism if it weren't for white women developing feminism. It's an ideology, a political orientation that allows women to be able to argue for certain rights and benefits in Western culture. So if white women can argue for it, and then, black women can argue by extension that they're women as well, but not only are they women, but they're black women, so that they're doubly oppressed, then they also get to share in the benefits associated with feminist thinking. But then the question becomes, is this way of thinking merely ideological, or does it have any basis in historical facts? That's why it's important to do the work. That's why we do the work. That's why I'm doing this. Now, if you can't understand that, I get it. If you feel like it's an unnecessary step, well, then, I get it. But
Green Gorilla, how many brothers, since that man put that in the comment section, are aware of that history?
I don't think they're aware of it at all. I don't think that they would ever come into contact with it at all. The only thing a lot of guys do is they deal with their immediate situation without doing any historical analysis whatsoever, without drawing and connecting dots between one tradition and the next. Look, I'm a philosopher. I study ideas, and also I'm a black man, and I'm engaging in black male studies. And so I want to, also explore ideas and, ideologies, and whether or not they're actually based on historical facts. But, because it sounds like they are. If you just listen to the social landscape today, you would just think that like women in European culture throughout the entirety of the culture, right, had no rights, no privileges, and like their lives were filled with drudgery and toil, just like African American slaves, or worse. That's the picture you would get. That's the idea and the concept formations that would take place along your lines of thinking. My desire is to question that. And it's not just black women. See, a lot of people think that the problem is black women. Like, oh, our problem is black women. Dude, it just shows to me that you really don't understand and really can't conceptualize the nature and the scope of the problem.
But they're not designed to get that, because let's be honest, when we look at us as a people, at the end we have failed each other, to be completely aware and really teach us from our own lens. When
Man,
we leave,
look,
Okay.
All I'm trying to point out is that, look, feminism in and of itself was started by white women. One could argue the first wave was the suffragette movement and white women demanding that they be, given the franchise and be able to exercise social and political autonomy the way the white men were in American society at the turn of the 20th century, or whatever the case may be. All right. And so, you got Frederick Douglass, who's also championing women's suffrage. And then, black men were about to be extended the franchise. And, the question had been, posed to Congress. And the first thing these white women did was they said, no, don't give these men the right to vote before you give it to us. Don't give them social and political autonomy and influence before you give it to us. Give it to us first. We're your mothers, your wives, your daughters, and your aunties and nieces. Give it to us first. So, just knowing this, and Frederick Douglass basically said, like, this to me is crazy. And why is it crazy? It's crazy because you got black men being hung from trees. Like, being castrated in front of audiences of white and black men. Somebody needs to cut their YouTube down. We need the right to vote first because we're suffering more. You got to turn that down, Semper Fidelis.
All right.
I'm going to have to mute his mic. So, yeah, that's why I'm doing this. To retrace the steps to get an accurate portrait of history so we can, be able to challenge these narratives. So if a woman tells you, women have always been subjected to misogyny, like, really? Like, to what degree and to what extent? And what does that have to do with me as a black man, for real, though? I already said, like, black men don't have any responsibility for what happened in medieval Europe anyway. We don't even have any responsibility for what happened in 20th century America or 18th century or 19th century America. But yet we still get categorized as patriarchs and misogynists. And the question is, how does that magic trick get performed? How do we end up with the prestige in the end, which demonstrates, okay, well, black men, participated in all of this. They always, along with white men, help hold women back. How? But the only answer to it is that black men want to be white men. Black men want to be just like white men. Now, do black men want to be respected? Yes. Do black men want to have the same access to services and, programs that women do? Yes. Do men want to have an impact over their children's lives? Yes. But oftentimes we find ourselves outside of the loop. And the question is, how can we get back into the loop? Or is it even possible in the context of the culture in which we live? I'm going to let some other people speak. Vic, you've been here for quite a bit of time, man. Go ahead and speak up, bro.
Hey, Peace, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, man.
All right, I guess I have a question or a statement or however you want to take it, but I'm just curious. Okay, so why is it that those particular women aren't told to not have the victim mentality, but they always telling us not to have a victim mentality? Do you have an answer for that? I don't know if you've seen Kanye West's recent rant. And, it's this thing where we can't complain about anything, but they can complain, but nobody ever tells a white woman not to have a victim mentality. So I just wanted to ask you that real quick, see what your answer was. Go.
Well, it's okay. So my answer is this. You're not going to like the answer for real. Like black men can take this and complain and ask for things from white people, or they can understand this and get angry and get up in arms about it. It's on you about what you want to do. And you can either handle it violently or you can handle it, diplomatically? You want to take the peaceful route, or you want to take the Panther route? How you want to handle this? Because ultimately, you're being fed a bunch of shit. Now, I mean, the question is, how do you want to handle this? It's on you. I mean, you can make whatever decision you want to make. A lot of people who are black, a lot of black men believe that, well, we don't need to complain. We just need to buckle down and, John Henry our way through this. Alpha our way through it. Well, the question is how? I'm going to tell you how white people alpha their way through their oppression and domination. They took up arms and they start killing motherfuckers.
Yeah, true.
Now, maybe you think that you got it so goddamn good in America that where, okay, well, I should never do nothing like that. This is the best places I've ever been in my life. I mean, if that's what you think, okay, that's cool. But you're the most incarcerated group in the world. You're the most killed group by your own group and other group by police in the world. You got the highest rates of homelessness, highest rates of illiteracy, and the list goes on. And even when you are successful, you still have high rates of depression and social isolation. So all this shit that motherfuckers are selling you about this high value shit, you can't cover up how fucked up your life is with motherfucking cologne and suits and ties and motherfucking Jaguars and Mercedes Benzes and shit. Your life is still fucked up. This is what guys are not like. Black men are like, man, I'm telling you, black men like to duck and dodge. And the only answer they got is, okay, well, I'm shit. I made it. You made what, dude? You got $100,000 job, man, and you still depressed as a motherfucker, and you still have no respect. And at any point, that shit can be taken away from you. But you still want to act like, okay, well, I'm the shit. I'm the alpha. You not, dog. You not alpha. That's a lie. Cut the fucking malarkey. Just cut it out, man. That's what I'm trying to get brothers to understand. You are not the shit in this culture, man. You're not.
And think about
now,
it.
Now, can black women to some like the other show, the last few shows I did, I demonstrated the ways in which women, even though they are, especially black women, are, manipulated by the system, they never have been the ones who take on the full direct animosity of this system because they can be manipulated or they don't pose a threat to the endogamy of whiteness. They can't get white women pregnant and fuck up their kinship idea. They can't do it. But black men can do it. Black men can start fucking white women and then all of a sudden, white people will go out of business. They won't exist in this motherfucker. If black men close off access to white women, white people go bye-bye. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yeah. Maybe you don't understand what I'm saying. Maybe you don't. Maybe somebody got to put it in some sugar-coated language to where you actually get it.
I get what you're saying.
You going in, bro. You going in.
I mean,
so the question is,
about it, this is very, if I may say this, GG, I don't mean to cut you off, bro. But if I may say this American culture that we have, what is the result of an insurgency against former white Brits who came over to occupy the 13 colonies of this landmass that was labeled America then, and they fought for it against the crown of mid 18th century Britain, right? Under King George III, right?
Right.
They told each other, one group of white men told another group of white men, hey, listen, fuck you. I'm going over here. And now when we dump this tea in Boston Harbor, what we're telling you is this: fuck you, King George III. We're taking over this shit for ourselves. Now bring it. Right?
See, white people don't have a problem being violent related to their own political ideas. Now, I'm not saying that this would be something that would be smart for black men because we outnumbered here. Okay, but like George Washington and those guys were outnumbered as well. I mean, like George Washington did guerrilla warfare. That's what that guy did. He used the same kind of warfare tactics that the Native Americans used on them when they got up in this joint. That's all he did. He used Native American tactics on the British and slowly whittled them down. The same way that the Vietnamese did to the American soldiers when they went to Vietnam. That's what George did. They didn't win all the battles, but they won the war because they basically were fighting the war on their own terrain. And, it was difficult for the crown to be able to have any control without the willing participation of the colonists.
Well, Nat Turner gave it his best, didn't he?
I mean, but at the end of the day, man, all I'm saying is you can do with this information. Like, I can't give you a political, solution to this other than to at least know what the facts are. Once we know what the facts are, then we can begin to decide, okay, well, how do we deal with this? How do we begin to, to be tactical about what's in our best interest? How do we begin to say, okay, well, this is how we do black men first? Or should we even do black men first? Because right now there's a psychological campaign going down to demonstrate that like black men are part of the problem, if not the biggest part of the problem. And I've already read like the third part of this paper on Curry, and ultimately it's the whole paradigm of black men or the white people or black people. The idea that black men are driven by the desire to be in the same position as white men. So like the same things that they're saying about us, I think are the same things that these people are doing. It demonstrates to me that it doesn't matter who you put in the slot of power. The relationship of power will not change. You could put black women in judgeships. Like Dr. Tia Son Johnson did a show, man, where you had a black female judge, man. She sentenced a black boy, man, to 241 years of prison, man. 241 years. That's a crazy shit right there, man. So it doesn't matter to me, like if you put a black woman in the slot, you can put a black man in the slot. If his mind ain't the right, orientated politically in the right kind of way, doesn't matter who you put in there. They put a black man in the presidency. Didn't he go after Libya? Didn't he kill Gaddafi?
Yep.
He was the one that killed Gaddafi, right?
Yeah. And guess what? They put
Maybe
black
I'm
men,
wrong.
They put,
Huh?
but listen, they put black men and women in Congress and called it what? The Congressional Black Congress? What are they doing?
Man, look, Obama dropped more drone bombs in Africa than George Bush did. Now, I'm not to say, I ain't trying to say that Africa's, got a full and clear. Because they're responsible for some of the shit that, that has happened to, Adolf's people. Via their, they're benefiting and profiting from the exchange and the sale of human beings. But, all I can say is, bro, all I'm trying to do is give you, a deep historical analysis, man. You can take it and do what you want to do with it. But I know what white folks did with it. They said being taxed without being represented was like being subjected to slavery. And they fought on that basis alone. They said, give me liberty or give me death.
But you know what Lincoln did, right? After Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, right? What did he say? I do not think that black men and white men can live. He is quoted to have said this. When the first black President Lincoln's own invitation he told them you should go to Africa. He sent them to Liberia. We know the history, right?
Yeah, but black men in America, man, we just like just like anybody else, man. We're used to this place, man. We're used to the abuse we receive here. We're used to this treatment. We're like, it's like being a frog in a boiling pot. We don't know what it's like elsewhere. We just don't know.
Well, frankly speaking for myself, I can't say that. I lived here in the Republic of Finland, where I presently live, for the last 30 years.
And what is it like over there?
Well, I mean, Finland is a white country, but I haven't had any problem as far as once I got registered here as an immigrant and got my permanent residence. I've had no problem with getting jobs. I had no problem with getting education, because I'd be educated myself. When I got discharged from the military in Quantico, Virginia, from MSG duty or Marine Security Guard duty, and I came back here. Yeah, there's some rigmarole I went through here, and I saw some of the hate and the prejudice too. But shit, it wasn't something that I did not see when I was living stateside, and I managed to deal with that, and managed to, with my wife of 30 years, we managed to raise 2 children here, and they're still alive, they're healthy, and they ain't suffering no trauma. You hear what I'm saying?
Right. So is you got a Finnish wife?
She's half Roma, or what the Europeans call gypsy, and half white Finn. Her father was full Roma.
Okay.
And my mom was white Finn. Yeah.
Gotcha. So the only thing I'm just trying to put out there, man, is look, what was life really like for these women? Because these women are basically going retroactive and looking back at history like their lives were like the worst foobar, fucked up beyond all recognition. Like they were just persecuted like Hebrew slaves. That's the way I look at it, man. And I'm like, when? And then black women by proxy are saying that they also are subjected to the same shit, and they want to crush the patriarchy. Like, what the fuck patriarchy are you talking about? And then that's why it's important for us to define terms and to look at patriarchy in its proper historical context, and to study it the way it actually operates and functions in the real world, not in the university, not in the textbook, not in the classroom.
Well, check this out.
How does it function, and why does it work the way it works? Why does it work the way it works? That's what I'm interested in doing. And if you're a black man, you would think you would have an interest in understanding that as fully as you possibly can. So that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. But black men can't see the forest for the trees, though, because they think all we got to do is just focus on what black women are doing. Black women aren't the lead; they're the tail in this, man. Mm-hmm. Black women ain't the orchestrators of this shit.
Nope. And I see, and the thing about it is, over here, I see black women and black men, primarily from the continent of Africa, who came here as refugees or political asylum seekers, running for positions in parliament, running for positions over here. We've had a female president over here. Oh, okay. I'm sorry about that, man.
Yeah, you borging out, man. I can't make out what it is that you're saying.
Oh, okay, man. My fault, man.
Things seem to be okay now. Go ahead.
Okay. What I was saying was we also have had a female Minister of Defense here in Finland. So the women over here dare not say that that they live in oppression. They can't say that. Shit, damn near half of parliament are women MPs over here in Finland.
Right, which is different than in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
It's different.
And then on top of that, though, but still on top of that, though, I mean, as far as, school teachers, kindergarten teachers, nurses and stuff like that, and GP practitioners, it's still distinctly women. There are more men getting into it. Of course, there are men doctors stuff like that. But they voluntarily and distinct. They have distinct sort of traditional gender roles as far as professional work is concerned here too. Ain't a whole lot. They're not a whole lot of female. There are not a whole lot of female police officers here in Finland. Neither are there a whole lot of female firefighters here in Finland either.
Yeah, well, I mean, that just goes without saying, man. The more equal, the more women have opportunities to do, pursue careers in any domains that they want, the more they go for the traditional careers that associated with women and femininity. That's around and across the board. I mean, there's been a study that demonstrates that, and we've been doing that for the past 20 years. That's just how it works.
I'm just saying that. 30 years that I've been living here, that's what reflects in everyday reality here.
Yeah, so some people say, well, that's only because women have been enculturated to take on subservient roles. I don't believe that that's the case. I just believe that women, they're going to take the less risky jobs. They're going to take the jobs that allow them to have longevity, as opposed to taking on the jobs that present the most risk to their physical integrity. That's just my opinion. So, but anyway, man, anybody else got something else to say? Because I'm ready to cut this short, man. I'm ready to go ahead and break wide and, get into this.
Hey, one question. The guy, is that you, sir, that's from Canada on the left-hand side near Gigi talking?
No, he's from Finland.
No.
He's from Finland,
bro. But can you ask me to talk before? Or you know who I am.
Yeah, I thought you said you're from Canada. Okay, Finland. All right, that's in Europe. Okay. Yeah, that's a European country.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's not many much. Finland. I think it's like what? It's like what, 2%, 3% people that's, I guess, quote unquote black live in Finland. I'm not sure what the population.
Yeah, something like that. About 4% now. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not. Yeah.
And most of them, and guess what? Most of the continent of Africa too.
Yeah, but at any rate, man.
What about Africa?
So let me close this out, man, and get done with this. Let me go ahead. So thank y'all for joining me, man. I'm about to give my closing remarks and get up on out of here, man. Appreciate y'all dropping by, man, and coming through and talking to me.
All right, peace.
Appreciate that. Appreciate it. So again, man, the only reason I did this was, I wanted to know what life is really like for women in medieval Europe. Is it as horrendous as white women who are feminists today make it out to be? I don't think it was as horrible as they make it out to be. That's just my opinion. So, I mean, in relation to how white women characterize their mistreatment throughout history and their, need to be angry and hostile towards men, and to crush, kill the patriarchy, like, come on, man. Stop it. Many of them were business owners, guilds persons, artisans, and so on and so forth, man. Now, were their lives like filled with the kind of autonomy that some women enjoy today? Probably not, but neither were men's lives either. Most men couldn't own property then either. They were subjected to vassalage and serfdom. So both men and women have a right to be pissed about the historical, conditions of feudal Europe. But, right now they monopolize, the aggression related to historical injustice. So it is what it is, man. Take it or leave it, like it or love it, man. But anyway, man, I'm going to holler at y'all later, man. And I'll see you tomorrow, man. I'm about to talk about domestic violence tomorrow. So I'll holler at y'all later, man. Peace.